Hello, and welcome to this course on incorporating Audition into your Premiere workflow. Adobe makes its powerful CC suite of applications, and it designs them to work together in many ways. And what this means for you as a user and a producer is you can save a lot of time moving between programs. You can take advantage of the best things that all of these applications have to offer without endless, tedious exporting, copying of files, synchronizing, and messing around with things like that. Both applications support audio tracking and editing, and Audition supports video playback as well. Adobe Audition is capable of many things that Premiere isn't, like advanced audio mastering, advanced audio analysis, restoration and repair. It's really designed to complement Premiere, to provide you with ways of working which go beyond what Premiere is able to do. So in this course, we're going to look at how Premiere handles audio, what its capabilities are, and then why you might want to send projects and audio through into Audition, and what Audition can offer you that Premiere can't. And you'll see that it's a very powerful audio editing environment that can really help you take your video projects to the next level. So let's dive in and look at the relationship between Premiere and Audition and how best to use them together. Premiere does have some good tools for working with audio. In the timeline here, you have your audio clips, and you can see that each of these shows you a small waveform to denote the audio that's on that track. In the same way that you can work with keyframes and effects for video in Premiere, you can also work with keyframes and effects for audio. If I double-click one of these clips, I can open its view here in the preview window, and you can see that this area here, this waveform, represents the same part of the waveform as down here. Now, there are various ways to work with things like volume and panning, and the first way that you can do that is in the effect control window for a clip. And if I just move this over so that you can see it more clearly, the basic set of effect controls for an audio track here are volume, channel volume, and panner. And if I was to open any of these, just like with video, you get keyframeable parameters. In the case of audio, they're fairly straightforward. They're just things like, is the track bypassed? Yes, that can be on or off. What's the track level? Of course, you can set the dB volume. You can set the channel's volume. You can set the volume of each side of the stereo field. And you can also set the panning. So where does it sit on the left or right of the stereo field? Back in the main timeline view over here, you're able to expand tracks like this to see them more clearly. You're able to mute and solo tracks. You're also able to do things like using their left and right handles to shorten and lengthen them. Now, what we're doing here is not really any kind of difficult or complex audio editing. We're really just working with blocks of data, just like you do when you're putting together an edit of any video. You're also able to change the input mapping of the audio tracks by clicking on them here. You can lock tracks. And of course, in Premiere's preferences, you can set up how Premiere deals with audio in and out. Things here like summing multi-channel outputs, automatic waveform generation, that's very helpful. You can also specify which audio hardware you want Premiere to use. And here you can see also there are some presets available for surround sound. If I wanted to drop any kind of audio effects on, I can do that from my effects bin here. I can go into audio effects, and here are the audio effects that are available to me. Some of these are Premiere's own, and some of them are plugins on my system. If I wanted to drop an effect onto an audio clip, I could find one that I wanted, for example, an EQ. I would just drop it onto the clip, and then just like with any video effect, that effects controls become available up here in the effect control section. So you can see now that in addition to volume, channel volume, and panning, which I had before, I've now got EQ. If I wanted to edit that, I would click on the edit button, and that's actually a third-party plugin that's installed on my system. So it's possible to work with audio clips and effects in the same way that you work with video clips and effects, but that's relatively limited in terms of what you might want to do with your audio. Let's have a look now at some of Premiere's slightly more advanced audio features. In Premiere, you do get access to slightly more advanced audio mixing and editing features. So for example, here, I've gone into Audio View, which has revealed my audio mixer. I could have also revealed that by going up to the Window menu and choosing Window Audio Track Mixer for this sequence. And what that shows me is a track mixer for my project. So here you've got regular things like channels and faders, mute, solo, and enable track for recording. I'm able to record directly in by using the little record button here. I can also record on my tracks here in the timeline. I've got left and right panners. I've got output assignment, which becomes more important when you're using things like surround sound for choosing different buses. If I pan up here in my section, this is my main audio track mixer for the whole sequence, you can see I have a couple of different areas here. Now at the top, I have my insert area. So I can click here and I'm able to access any of the effects that come with Premiere. These are the ones in this upper section. And down at the bottom, I'm also able to access my audio units because I'm on a Mac, and also my VST plugins, which I would get on a Mac or a PC. And if I wanted to load any of those, let's say a graphic equalizer, I would just select it. And I then have two ways to edit it. I can either use this little drop down here to change this quick control to controlling any of the available parameters. So if I wanted to move EQ band 6 or 4, I could do it that way. I can mute the effect by using that button, or I can actually double click on the name of the effect, which opens its main window, and you can see that setting I just made has made that change there. I could close that. I could load up another effect. So I could say this time I want stereo expander. There it is. Again, double click on it. I'm able to then edit that effect. Down here, if I close that, this is the send effects section. If I click on these, I basically get access to my send assignments, which I can make more use of if I'm working with surround sound. So this section is relatively useful. You can use it to add insert and send effects, and you can use it to mix your project. But what it can't really do is more advanced stuff, like advanced audio editing. And that's where Audition would come in. We'll look at that shortly. Before we do that, let's briefly just have a look at the clip mixer, which is a relatively recent feature in Premiere. From my shortcut here, I'm able to choose Audio Clip Mixer for my sequence. And this is different to the Audio Track Mixer. The Audio Track Mixer controls the levels for each audio track, regardless of what's on that track. But the Audio Clip Mixer controls the volumes of the different clips at different points. So if I were, for example, to have 3 or 4 different clips on this track, what I could do is set their volume at different points. So for example, at this point here, I move my timeline. Here's my first audio clip. What I could do, just to demonstrate this, is I could chop this up. And then I could say, at this point here, I want my main voiceover clip to be quieter. Okay? And when I move the timeline forward, as I move the playhead over the point at which the clips cross, you can see the volume leaps back up. And what that's done is that's told Premiere that I want this clip to be at this volume regardless of the audio channel mixer levels. And then when it moves across, I then want it to be at a different level. And you can also see, as well as the level in the clip mixer changing, you can see the level here in the actual clip. The volume handle has moved down. Now I'm also able to move that volume handle up manually, like this. And when I do that, you can see that the clip mixer fader also moves. So that's just quite an interesting little way of having different clips at different volumes on the timeline, and without having to basically create lots and lots of audio clips, which is a bit of a pain. You can also use Premiere's keyframing system, just like you would in the effect control window, to keyframe the volume of clips over time. Again, this is separate from the main audio mixer, which can also be automated. So there are some basic mixing tips for Premiere. But what if you wanted to send a clip from Premiere into Audition for more extensive editing, because Audition has far more tools? Let's look at that in the next video. In Premiere, you're able to make basic edits to audio clips. You can apply plugins and effects to them, you can chop them up and things like that. But you can't do really in-depth editing. Let's say that you had a clip. Here's my clip. And let's say I wanted to do some more in-depth audio editing on that, for example, audio repair. What I could do is I could right-click on that clip, and then I could choose Edit Clip in Adobe Audition. And when I do that, what Premiere will do is it will use a shared copy of that clip and send it through to Audition, which it will open. So if I do that, you'll see that work. So it's going to render down that clip to a shared version. And now it's opened Audition. And you can see already that I have a more advanced audio editing environment for my audio clip. Now, if I was to go back to Premiere, I could choose a different clip and do the same thing. I could right-click on it and choose Edit Clip in Adobe Audition. It would render it down, and again, it would fire it through. Now, it's just doing these one clip at a time for the moment. We'll look shortly at how you can send multiple clips through at the same time. So with my audio file shared and sent through from Premiere into Audition, I'm able to do more detailed editing on it. So for example, I'm able to zoom right in. I can get into great detail here. I'm able to also kind of change the view so I can see it in more depth. I can do things like selecting sections of clips, like this. I can also select areas of clips and I can apply effects to them. So for example, I might want to apply noise reduction, dehumming. I might want to apply reverb to sections of a clip or to whole clips. I might want to edit spectrally here in the Spectrum editor, draw around areas of sound and do things to that, process effects onto them or change their volume. And once I'm done with my clip, I'm able to save it and send it back through into Premiere and reincorporate it into my project. So that's how you would do one clip at once. But what happens if you want to bring lots of clips through at once from Premiere to Audition? Well, let's have a look at that next. If you have a project with lots of audio tracks in Premiere, you may well want to send some or all of those tracks through into Audition at the same time to perform more advanced edits. Here you can see I have a number of tracks in my project. And the way this works is using a clever system that Adobe calls Dynamic Link. And what Dynamic Link does is it essentially renders out copies of these files to a central location on your hard drive, and then it enables Audition to access those files. So you don't have to manually render them out and name them and choose a destination. You can have Premiere do it for you. So if I make sure my sequence is selected here, so here's what you need to understand about this. You can name the sequence if you want, although it will just inherit the name of the sequence from Premiere. You can choose a path for your rendered files if you like, although it's usually safe to leave it on the default Adobe Audition interchange folder, which it automatically sets for you. Here you can choose the sequence. Do you want to send your entire sequence, or do you just want to send the marked in to out points? I'm going to send the entire sequence because it's not very long. But if you had a very long project and you only needed to export some sections of it, you would choose in to out. Do I also want to send the video? You can either choose no, DV preview, or send through Dynamic Link, which will send a copy of the video through to Audition so you can watch it. That's usually, again, the best and easiest way to work. It's going to add 1 second audio handles, which is great. Now, any effects that I have applied inside Premiere, I can choose whether to send them through, whether to render them, or whether to ignore them. So, any clip effects that I may have applied in Premiere, do I want to transfer the settings across And of course, because Adobe makes both programs, it will be able to read those settings. Do I want to render all clips that have non-transferable effects, so effects that might work in Premiere but not in Audition? Do I want to just render everything, or do I actually want to remove those clip effects before rendering down the files and sending them through to Audition? Again, the default here is usually the safest, which is to just transfer everything straight across. That way you're not committing yourself to any changes. And the same again with track effects. Do I want to transfer my track effects through, or do I want to remove them before sending? Do I want to send pan and volume information through? Yes, I do. And once I've sent the data, do I want to open it in Adobe Audition? Yes, I want to do that too. So if I press OK, what it will do is it should render everything down. And it sends it through to a multi-track session. And you can see it's inherited the information that was already present in the Premiere audio tracks. So it's inherited these volume levels. It will have also inherited any effects that I'd added, or any panning, things like that. Now, a multi-track session is different from the waveform view. You can see at the top here, we have waveform, which is for simple individual audio clips and tracks. And we also have multi-track view. And so this is all of our tracks viewed in a similar sort of timeline interface to how we saw them in Premiere. One of the cool things you can do with Audition that you can't do in Premiere is easy batch editing of audio material. Now you'll have noticed this batch process section here. You can take any of the audio files in your project, these are the ones which I've dynamically linked through from Premiere. You can drop them into the batch processing area. Once they're inside that area, I can choose various different presets of things I might want to do to all those clips in one go. So for example, if I wanted to hard limit them all, to make them all as loud as they could be without peaking, I could choose to hard limit them here. I could choose to normalize them, raise all their pitches, remove hum from them all in one go, and various other things. Another useful tool is the match loudness tool, which is here. And if you can't see that, it's in Window and Match Loudness. You can easily call it up. Again, what I would do here is I would drag and drop any of the files from the browser that I wanted to have their loudnesses matched, and I could drop them into this area here. Audition will analyze them all. And you can see at the moment they all have different peak values. So some of them are quieter than others. Now this isn't their volumes in the mixer. This is the levels within the clips themselves. You can see you actually get a lot of different information about the clip here. So none of them are actually clipping, which is good. But here's their perceived loudness, their actual loudness, their peak and true peak, and their ITU loudness. If I move down slightly, what I'm able to do here in the Match To menu is choose how I want those files to all be conformed. And if I click on that, there are various different broadcast standards here that I can work to. So I might want to say, typically, I want all of their peak amplitudes to come to no more than -1 dB. And if I then click Run, Audition quickly thinks, and it performs that action on them. And the reason that's important is because that's a really great way, if you've got material from all kinds of different sources like Foley, voiceover, music, this isn't mixing them, remember, that comes later. This is basically just ensuring that their relative loudnesses all match. And when you might have 30, 40, 50 tracks of audio, it's incredibly useful to be able to just quickly apply that setting to all of them in one go. I'm also able to undo that if I want to. That will just put them back to how they were. I'm going to just redo it quickly. So it's very easy to batch process audio files in Audition. It's much easier than it is in Premiere. Now the Match Loudness tool, that keeps everything inside Audition. You don't have to export anything. If you do use the batch process tool, then that actually wants you to process them out of Audition to the hard drive. And in order for that to work, you do have to first configure some export settings. So here's where it's going to put my files. Here's the format it's going to put them out in. Do I want to change their sample type? Actually, I don't in this case. You generally don't want to start changing sample types and sample rates as you're moving between Audition and Premiere. You should be leaving things on the full quality that your original Premiere project was in. So if I did want to put these out, I could specify those settings, click OK, and then click Run, and it will batch process out all my files. I would then be able to import those into another application, including back into Premiere. Let's look at some of the ways you can edit audio in Audition which are quicker or easier than in Premiere, or which are in fact impossible in Premiere. So here's my waveform. I'm in waveform view. I'm looking at a single audio clip here. I can get an overview of it in the top. I can move around it. I can also use these handles to zoom in and out on different parts of it. And I can use these tools down at the bottom to zoom in and out on parts of the waveform, like that. I'm not actually changing the waveform here. All I'm doing is changing my view of it. Now I've got the time selection tool selected here. So I can select part of my waveform. And when I do that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually select a small part so I can demonstrate looping. I'm going to zoom in.
The ATA and the Debrecen Research Center began experimenting with another way. The ATA and the Debrecen Research Center began
So when I select time range, it automatically creates a loop and puts looping on. I can turn looping off if I prefer, but I'm going to leave it on. I'm also going to zoom in a bit more so you can just get an idea of how much more forensically we can go into the waveform of any clip here. So here's my clip. I can scroll back and forth. If I pick up this green area, I can scroll within the waveform without moving the loop. If I pick up this tiny handle here, I can actually move my loop selection like this, which is quite helpful. So there are various different ways of picking up and moving your markers. Now, this little thing here is called the heads-up display. I can move this around if I want, so it's not covering this area. This doesn't affect how it works. And this is a very quick way of changing the volume within a selection inside a part of a waveform. So I could turn this part of the waveform, for example, down. And it would process it. It does it so quickly you can barely see it.
Experimenting with another way. The ATA and the Debrecen Research Center began experimenting with another way. They wondered, what if?
So the part after I finished editing there is louder. I could undo that either by using the regular edit undo command or Command or Control Z. I could also use the history window to go backwards. That's worth mentioning actually. Any edits that you make inside Audition are generally non-destructive until you choose to make them destructive by committing or rendering things down. So with your history window here, which again, if it's not available, you can just go Window History to call it up. You'll be able to see all the different edits and changes that you've made to a file. And you can step back and forward like this. That's quite helpful. As well as changing the volume of sections of clips, there are some other things you can do from the effects menu, including inverting the stereo field of a clip. I'm going to undo that. You can also reverse it. Again, more useful for things like sound effects really than speech. You can also insert silence, which will remove all the signal without changing the length of the overall clip. So you don't have to actually chop anything. That will just put some silence in there. Complete silence, undo. And you can do things like generating noise and even generating reference tones. That's quite interesting for when you're working in post-production. So here's your generate tone window. We're not going to get into that too much because it's slightly beyond the scope of this course. If I apply an effect in waveform view, it affects the whole clip. If, however, I go to Multitrack view, I can do more creative things with effects inside Audition. You'll see that when I do go to Multitrack view, my effects rack changes and it now shows me the option to use clip effects or track effects. And track effects affect everything on a single track. So however many audio clips I have on this track, they will all be processed through whichever effects I load up in here. Clip effects, on the other hand, are only applied to individual clips. So I'm going to show you a practical example of how this works. Here in track effects, I'm going to add, for argument's sake, an echo, so it's really obvious what's happening, okay? So here's my echo.
Ethiopians who farm it have historically gotten limited.
So that's affecting everything on that track. Now at the moment there's only one clip on that track. So I'm just going to close that and remove it.
Benefits from
I have to make sure my track is selected so I can see the correct set of effects slots here. I'm going to remove that effect. Now, if I zoom in, let's say, for example, I only want to apply some effect to a certain part of this clip, right? So I'm going to need to zoom in and just make some edits. So I'm going to use my scissors tool here, my razor tool, to select this part, okay? So here's a clip that I've selected. What does it sound like?
So the 6 million Ethiopians who farm it have historically gotten limited.
Okay, so at the moment, that sounds exactly the same because all I've done is cut that clip out, but I haven't changed anything. Now, if I was to select this clip and go into the clip effects section, any effect that I apply here is only going to apply to this clip, not the whole track. So the parts of the audio either side of it will be unaffected. So for example, I'm going to apply the echo just so it's really obvious. Here's my echo. And you can see that this clip that I've created gets a little FX icon on it, which shows that the clip has effects applied. If I now play across that clip, the parts before and after won't be affected, but this part will.
From the international research community. So the 6 million Ethiopians who farm it have historically gotten limited benefit.
Okay, so that's quite an extreme example. You wouldn't normally necessarily put that kind of effect on something, but what you might do is, if you were trying to match up some speech or some sounds to the action in a video, what you might do is, for example, have not echo, but you might have compression and reverb, for example. So if I was to add some compression, and I was to say a voiceover compressor plus some reverb,
research community. So the 6 million Ethiopians who farm it have historically gotten limited.
So I could make it sound like that guy was in a different location for that part of his speech, right? I could turn up the wet control, turn down the dry.
The international research community. So the 6 million Ethiopians who farm it have historically gotten limited benefits from.
So that's quite an extreme example. That's not the kind of thing precisely that you would do, but it shows you how it works. So I'm able to affect different clips within a track without affecting the whole track. And of course, if I then wanted to apply a track effect to the whole track, I could do that too. Make sure the track is selected, and then go into track effects, and I could select something else. I could say maybe I wanted to stereo expand everything on that track.
Little attention from the international research community. So the 6 million Ethiopians who farm it have historically gotten limited benefits from modern improvements in farming techniques and technologies. In particular,
so this effect, because it's a track effect, is now affecting everything, including the clip that I selected, sort of cut up earlier and applied separate effects to. So this clip has now got its clip effect and the track effect. These two sections here only have the track effect. And if you multiply that over various different tracks. That's actually quite a clever way of working with things like dynamics, reverb, and EQ for different parts of different tracks within a project. So you don't have to sort of export little loops from Premiere. You can basically import all your stems, and then you can create little regions like this, and you can apply things like volume, you can apply fades, you can use these fade handles here, and you can apply effects either to entire tracks or to clips or both. Let us look next at doing some audio repair. And one of the cool things that you might want to do in Audition is noise reduction. So here I've selected a part of my clip.
Years ago, the ATA and the WSH Research Center began experimenting with another way, but several years...
which has a little bit of noise in the background. And I'm just going to remove this effect from before because I don't need it anymore. What I can do is either as a clip or a track effect, but I'm going to do it as a track effect. I can choose from either my presets here, or I can go into my effect selection and I can go into the noise reduction and restoration section. So here is the noise reduction effect, and if I select that, I have various different controls. Now what this will do is it will analyze my signal for what it thinks is noise, which I can set a threshold for here. I can also fine-tune the noise floor. I might also want to put it into high quality mode because in my experience that actually makes it much more effective.
Years ago, the ATA and the WSH Research Center began experimenting with another way. But several years ago, the ATA and the WSH Research Center began experimenting with another way. But several years ago, the ATA and the WSH Research Center began experimenting with another way. But several years ago...
So it's quite subtle, but that's actually taking out a little bit of the crunchiness from the background. Again, if I go into my presets menu here, I can choose things like heavy noise reduction or light noise reduction. I'm also able to save my own presets if I want to. That's quite helpful. Here's another example. If I go back into my noise reduction and restoration folder, I can do things like removing clicks from audio. So again, if you've got audio with some clips and clicks in it, you can use this to remove those. There are presets again, different kinds of levels of click reduction. And as always with these kind of processes, it's a gradual, it's an art form really. You have to basically find the right settings for each individual piece of audio and refine them. One of the other interesting effects here again is the de-hummer. If you have audio with hum in it, which can be really difficult to get rid of, this plugin is actually designed to help you do that. You have specific frequency settings here, so you might want to remove a very specific frequency from your audio. You can go through these and you can of course audition each one to see what works best for you, and then you're also able to modify that and move the hum removal settings around. You can also choose to output the hum only, which will help you to identify exactly what it is that you're isolating and removing. Another helpful tool for analyzing audio for problems is found up here in the window menu, and that's called Diagnostics. So if I call up my Diagnostics window, which again, like many other things, is also available from a shortcut here in the little menu in the corner of this window. Now this only works in waveform mode, so if I make sure I'm in waveform mode, I can select any of my files. I can then choose how to scan it. So do I want to scan it for clicks, clips, silence, or anything else? So let's say I want to scan it for clicks. I can scan it. And here it thinks it's found some problems. Now, that's a very specific list of different clicks. You can see if I select them here, it tells me where it thinks they are. I can repair them one by one, or I can repair them all. Once again, you have weight settings, so heavy, light, or medium. And it works in the same way for example, the declipper. So I could scan it for clipping. Has it found any? It thinks it's found a couple of clips. Do I want to repair them all? Yes, I do. And there they are, they've been repaired. The silence option is interesting. This is a bit more destructive, but I can scan, you can see this file has lots of silence in it. If I scan it for silence, yes, there are all the periods of silence, and I could delete them all if I wanted to. Now, because that's destructive, it's going to tell me that that's going to cause some problems with my main project. So you have to be really sure you want to do that. That's more useful for things where you have long periods of silence, maybe lots of them over the course of a file, and you want to pull them all out. But I'm not going to do that. Let's look next at Spectral View. One of the things that Audition does very well that Premiere is not able to do is spectral audio editing. And this works in multi-track mode. So what I've got here is I've got my voiceover track. I've selected a part of it. I'm going to go into waveform view. Here it is. And this is the same clip I was just looking at. Now, what I'm going to do here is go into the spectral frequency display mode. And when I do that, I get a different kind of view, a different kind of display of the signal. This is a regular linear waveform with peaks and troughs to show amplitude. This, however, is a spectral view, and that gives me a different take on the audio that's inside my file, different take on the signal. So you can see that there are some links between these sections. So for example, where the waveform is louder, there is more yellow, which means there's more of a certain type of signal there. But there's also this other stuff up here. And what you tend to find is that the stronger signals, the voices and things like that, exist down at the bottom of the spectral display, and they are colored yellow in this case, whereas the more sort of ambient background sounds exist up towards the top. So if I play this,
and plans turn to be weaker. There is competition for resources, and plans turn to be weaker.
Now, as a matter of interest, you can see that this section here on the original recording is where someone's made a voice edit, and they've actually left a gap. That's slightly sloppy editing, but I'm not too worried about that right now, because in the context of the whole soundtrack, that would be papered over by some music or something else. So you can hear that in this clip,
there is competition for resources, and plans turn to be weaker.
There's quite a lot of background noise, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to expand my spectral view up a little bit, and then I'm going to use either my marquee selection tool or my lasso. In this case, I might choose the marquee selection tool, and then I'm able to select different parts of the spectrum. Now, I'm not selecting part of the waveform. You can see that when I do this, it's not selecting anything in the waveform. I'm still selecting over time, but now I'm selecting from inside the spectral view of the sound, not the waveform view. This is quite organic, so I can click and hold, and I can use the mouse to move this around. It's also selecting the same area on both left and right channels. So when I do this, my heads-up display now controls the volume of this part of the frequency spectrum, not of the waveform. So if I was to turn this down, what I've done there is I've isolated part of the sound, but not using EQ, but using spectral tools. And as I move this around, you can hear that it affects different parts of the sound. So you can see, or hear, in fact, well, you can see and hear, that's the point, that most of the guy's speech is down here.
For resources, and
as I move my selection upwards, I very quickly lose the bottom and middle end of his speech. So all this stuff up here really is just top end. So if I was, for example, to turn this down, and then deselect that, you can see what it's done is it's sort of semi-removed or turned down a lot of the top end there. So if I play back, this might be a little bit extreme, but what you should hear is that I've taken out some of that hiss.
there is competition for resources, and plans turn to be weaker.
Okay, so that was a bit hardcore. So what I can do is I can step back a little bit, put it back to where it was, and then I can just dial it down slightly. I have to deselect before I can hear it.
Competition for resources and plans turn to be weaker.
Yep. So as ever with these kind of tools, it's basically a process of elimination. You have to be quite careful. You have to spend some time. Now, it could be that the marquee tool isn't as effective as it could be. It selects too wide a selection of sounds. So in that case, I could use the lasso tool. Now, the lasso tool is much more forensic because what it allows you to do is draw around an individual sound. So, for example, if I'd identified this sound here, just as an example, as being something that I wanted to get rid of, I could draw around it. So it's now selected. And I could use either the heads-up display to change its volume, or I could actually apply effects to it, or I could say I want to auto-heal that selection, or I want to invert it, reverse it, or introduce silence. So if I now deselect, what you can see is that that sound has been removed from the middle of the spectrum without affecting the waveform. If I was to zoom in a bit more, I could say, what's this thing here? And again, I could go heal that and deselect.
In given area.
So that's how you go through and identify sounds inside the waveform. You can actually reach inside the waveform and remove, modify these things. You can make them louder if you wanted. You would normally be making them quieter. And once you've done that, you can, of course, leap back into Multitrack view, and all the changes that you made will be part of this file as it still exists in a Multitrack. Another interesting tool in Audition and also in Premiere, and a tool that works across both applications, is something called the Essential Sound Panel. And this is something that Adobe has developed to help you batch process and manage groups of audio files within and across apps. Now, it's actually not visible at the moment, but if I was to go Window, Essential Sound, I can call it up, and I might want to put it here, let's say. There we go. Now, the way that this works is I have basically a series of categories. So I'm going to start with the simple stuff. So here are the clips in my project. Here they are. I can select them. And for any clip, I can assign an audio type. And just to make the point that this is also in Premiere, here's my Premiere project from earlier. And I have basically exactly the same set of tools here. So this works in either application. I go back to Audition for a moment. So I happen to know, for example, that this is a dialogue clip. So in my Essential Sound panel, I can say, assign type dialogue. And when I do that, I get this tiny little sort of speech bubble icon here, which tells me and tells Audition and Premiere that that is marked as a dialogue clip. I happen to know that down here, this is music, so I could then mark that as music. I also happen to know that these other clips are ambience and or sound effects. They happen to be ambience actually. So when I move between them now, these different clips that I've just assigned types to, you can see that their type in the Essential Sound panel changes. If I decide I wanted to change my mind, I can clear an audio type like that, which just resets it to 0. It doesn't affect the mix or the audio or anything. It's just tagging. Essentially, all you're really doing here is tagging. And one thing that's interesting as well is that, for example, if I make sure that these clips here are assigned ambience, you can see they get a little bit of text here as well so I can see them. I'm pretty sure that's ambience as well. There it is. Again, a little icon to tell you. One thing that I can do is I can go into Edit and I can choose Select All Clips of Audio Type, and then I can choose one of the types that I've assigned using the Essential Sound panel. Now, since I haven't assigned any sound effect tags yet, sound effects is not available, but I have assigned some ambience tags. So if I select Edit, select Clips of Audio Type Ambience, it automatically selects the clips that I've marked as ambient sound. Now, when you have a project which is very large, with lots of clips over a long time, that's actually very, very useful. And the reason it's useful is because the essential sound panel for each of its audio tag types, or its audio types, it lets you assign parameters and settings. Now, you can set these individually, or you can set them all in one go. You can match them. Now, that's really useful because it means you can do things like you can make sure that all your vocals, for example, all your voiceover are set to a certain loudness or a certain stereo width. Let's look next at a practical example of how that works. Once you've used the essential sound panel to assign audio types to various clips within a project, what you're able to do is apply settings quickly to those clips, either on an individual or on a multiple clip basis. And really what this is, it's kind of like a shortcut to a lot of the stuff that you would otherwise do over here. So when you do things like applying some of these effects and settings, what it's really doing is it's applying effect racks complete with settings. It's applying things like effect presets, but it just provides you with an easier way of viewing and managing those presets and those sets of processes. So for example, here's my dialogue clip. I'm just going to solo it up.
The following year, working with...
So what I might want to do is apply a general preset to this clip. So what is it? Well, is it a female? Yes, female voice, right? So what it's going to do is apply lots of processing.
The agriculture extension system, the other technology package, as we call it,
And if I look at the clip effects tab, because I'm using the essential sound section to apply a bunch of processing to this clip, it's automatically put an effects chain in there and it's applied it to that clip. And you can see using these icons here that it's had things done to it. So we now know it's got effects applied, it's had gain applied, and there's the gain amount. And this is that same icon from earlier that tells us it's had a tag applied to it. I could undo that if I wanted. I could choose something else. I could say, what is it? I could make it sound like it's coming over an intercom. Again, that will put a bunch of plugin settings.
1,430 farmers and 90 farmers training centers. And the result showed...
And I could undo that. So presets are really useful. There's also various other sections here. So I might want to quickly reduce the noise. And again, that puts a noise reduction plugin onto the clip. But I get basically a quick control. I get one control to control the whole kind of bunch of settings. And I could dial in some other stuff, de-hum as well, de-essing.
65% increase in yield compared to the national average.
Yeah.
I've got different sections. So that first one was my loudness section, where I can auto match loudness. I've looked at auto repair. I could turn that off if I decided I didn't want it, minimize that section. I could improve the clarity of the audio by using this dynamic slider.
Yield compared to the national average.
I could also, for example,
Most recently, with a massive push from the country,
use an EQ preset here.
country's agricultural extension agents, the Ministry of Agriculture and the regional bureaus targeted a full 5 million Ethiopian teff farmers into.
And the different audio types have different sets of controls. So that was basically specific to dialogue because I marked it as dialogue clip. I went down to my ambience clip here. You see, I get different things. So I don't get any vocal specific processing because it's not vocals. But I do get loudness, reverb, what kind of ambience is it, and stereo width. And for music, a slightly different set of controls. There's an interesting little feature here called Remix, which basically analyzes your clip and tries to make it fit a certain duration. That's quite interesting. And again, level. And this is where the interesting part comes in about being able to select all the clips at once. So for example, if I did the trick from before and went to Edit, select all clips of audio type ambience, I can then apply these settings to all the selected clips at once. And that's really useful. Imagine that you had lots of dialogue clips and you'd mark them as dialogue clips. You could then quickly select them all and you could quickly say, I want them all to become a little bit quieter, a little bit louder. I want them all to sound a bit more natural or a bit more focused. Or you could apply a preset to all of them at once. When you've made all your edits and processes and you've done all your kind of forensic spectral editing on your audio in Audition, you may want to get a good mix going. And the way to do that is to go into the mixer section. You can also use the presets here to choose, for example, advanced mixing, which gives you advanced monitoring tools.
It started just with
5-year plan to literally transform the country's agriculture sector, undertaking a host of new strategic interventions aimed at significantly improving the livelihood.
And you might want to customize this to get your mixer up so you get a better view of what's going on in the mix.
Livelihoods and food security of its 13 million smallholder farming families. This is one of those interventions.
Teff, the unique tiny cereal grain, indigenous to Ethiopia and central to the
So of course you have your master channel, just like you have in Premiere.
country's diet and culture.
And you've got a level meter on the right here. You also have various advanced meters. So you can do things like checking the phase of your audio. You can check whether it's in phase or out of phase, whether it's going to behave itself when it's played back on various different kinds of systems, from stereo all the way through to surround.
As the main ingredient in injera, most Ethiopians eat teff with virtually all of their daily meals. However, due to rising demand and limited supply, the market price for teff has risen dramatically in recent years, putting the essential grain out of reach of a growing percentage of Ethiopia's population.
You can actually perform automation within Audition as well, if you like. And it's actually very simple. There are two ways to do it, really. The first way is a more conventional audio mixing technique, which is to go to the audio channel for the channel you want to automate and simply put it into write mode.
Because that is almost exclusive to Ethiopia, it is what is called an orphan crop.
And then it automatically puts itself into touch mode, which means it will pick up and start rewriting automation if you choose to keep automating it afterwards. If I just move back to where it was, what you should see,
putting the essential grain out of reach of a growing percentage of Ethiopia's population.
Because that is almost exclusive to Ethiopia, it is what is called an orphan crop.
So that's a very easy way to automate in Audition, automating volume. If I go into my main timeline view and click on this little expansion arrow here, I can choose to show automation envelopes. Now, because I've just automated some volume, it's showing me with this little star thing here that I have in fact just automated some volume. So if I then choose to show that, you can see here is the section that I just automated. Now it's kind of zoomed out, so I need to zoom in a bit. But there's the automation that I just created.
That is almost exclusive to Ethiopia. It is what is called an orphan crop.
And of course, just like in Premiere's effects editor, I can add keyframes here as well, just using the mouse. And then I can create volume ramps and fades very easily by simply dragging this key point around, and I can do that as many times as I want. And I can do that for any track. Now within a clip, I also have these interesting volume handles. I can change the volume of entire clips at once using these handles. I can also add key points to these. So bear in mind that this is separate. This is clip-based volume automation, whereas this is mixer volume automation. So the changes that I make here will affect the clip's volume regardless of the mixer volume. But the channel's fader will be affected by the settings I make in the envelope section here. And that also applies to these other things. So I can mute a track selectively using this track automation section. I can change panning, and I can also make some fairly detailed tweaks to the track's EQ if I like. I'm also able to automate the master fader, and I can do that in one of two ways. I can automate it as I did in my initial example by simply putting the master track in write mode and automating. Creating fade. I can also go to my master track here in this view, and if I zoom down, this also has track envelopes. So I can choose to show the master track envelope. I can scroll down. I can say, here's volume, which I know I just automated, and I can then edit that. If I wanted to delete these keyframes, I could simply go into the keyframe view, which allows me to move between them and add new ones. Also allows me to clear all of them. So that's a really quick way to get rid of all the keyframes. You just find the section that you want to edit. Let's say this one again, and choose clear. And that just removes all the automation from that clip or that track, depending on what you have selected. So let's say that you've finished all your editing and mixing and effecting in Audition, and you want to send your audio back through into Premiere because you have to finish your final edit. There are a couple of ways to do it. The first thing to note is that you must have saved in Audition. Now, you will almost certainly have done this already, but if you haven't saved it, you have to save it first. So I'm just going to save it. And then you go File, Export, and export to Adobe Premiere Pro. Now, when you do this, you get several options. The first thing is you can give it a name. It's automatically appended this with AU tracks, which is quite helpful, AU for Audition. You can tell it where to put the files if you want. You can choose a sampler rate, but I'm going to leave it at 48 kilohertz, which is digital video sampling rate. And here are the interesting options. Now, you can choose to export each track as an individual stem, and that will simply put out every track as its own audio file. Now, that's quite useful because that will give you complete control over any further editing and mixing and moving things around that you might want to do in Premiere. So that's the most flexible option. If you set up multiple buses, you can export each bus as a stem. So you might, for example, have a bus for vocals, a bus for sound effects, and a bus for music. That might make mixing and arranging things in Premiere slightly easier. Let's say you had 30 audio channels. You might sort of rationalize those down to 5 or 6 audio buses, which can be a better way to manage big projects. If you choose to mix down the session, that will, as you might expect, mix all these tracks down into the kind of file that you specify. Now, mono is fairly unlikely because no one really works in mono anymore. A stereo file is probably quite likely because basically then you would be saying, okay, this is my finished audio project, this is done, and I want to put it back into Premiere because all I have to do is glue it onto my video and then export it through Media Encoder. You might also want to put it out as a 5.1 surround file, which again, if you were working in surround, would take care of everything automatically. Let's say, for example, I want to export each of my tracks as a stem. I then, when it's done, want it to open in Premiere. So if I export now, it's going to take a minute to think about what it's doing. It's going to render those files down. It's going to jump me back to Premiere, and now it's going to ask me how I want to cope with those tracks. Do I want to put those tracks onto any of my existing tracks, or do I want to create new audio tracks? And yes, actually, I do. So if I choose OK, what it will do, if I just maximize the timeline here, it's created a bunch of new tracks. And these are the same as the tracks that I originally exported before I started working on them in Audition. They've now got all those edits done, and they've now been brought back in, and they've actually inherited the track names, as you can see here, which is quite useful. So what I could do now is I might want to mute my original tracks because I now have new versions of those tracks complete with all their edits.
They wondered, what if you reduced the seed rate significantly and planted teff in rows, like other crops? And the results were pretty extraordinary.
So when plants are crowded in...
So what I'm playing back here is I'm playing back my edited tracks from Audition. But because of the way that Dynamic Link works, because everything is designed to stay in sync, I haven't had to synchronize anything. They've stayed perfectly synchronized, which is amazing. Another way to do it, if I was to just get rid of these, spin down, just delete these tracks for now. I could go back into Audition and I could say actually what I wanted to do, rather than exporting stems, is I wanted to export, oops, that's the wrong option, apologies. You could say actually what I wanted to do was export as a stereo file. And what that would do is it would create a much simpler version. Yes. Put it on a new audio track, yes please. And down at the bottom here, that's created a simple stereo track with all my sound in it.
The unique tiny cereal grain, indigenous to...
With both years showing at least a 70% question year to year, this is the transition to more market-oriented farming, where food security is significantly strengthened and smallholder farmers actually have surpluses to sell.
Here's an interesting little tweak that you may not know about. If you select the stereo file that's been sent through from Audition, even if Audition has been closed in the background and is no longer running, this file has been tagged with its creator program, which is Audition, and with the related project, which is the one I was just working on. So if I right-click on this stereo file and I choose Edit Original, what you should find is I get the option here to open either a regular waveform view in a new project in Audition, so that would just edit the output version, the stereo file, but more interestingly, I get the choice to open the Audition multitrack session that created the file. So that means, even if I've exported a stereo mixdown back into Premiere, as long as I've saved everything, I can jump back and I can make edits to the raw Audition project file, which is here. So if I got something slightly wrong, I could come back in and change it, even though I had actually exported a stereo mixdown. So now what I've got in Premiere is a simple stereo file, which I can still edit. I can still edit the raw Audition session and come back and forth, keep using those same techniques. But here I am back in Premiere with my finished audio. So we've seen that the fact that Adobe makes both of these programs makes it really easy to move between them. And although Premiere has some really good audio editing features, the clip mixer, the track mixer, and effects and things like that, there's a lot of stuff that you can do in Audition that you can't do in Premiere. So you can load your own plugins, of course, but you can also get much more detailed editing. You can use Spectral editing. You can use things like Spectral pitch editing. You've got these auto healing tools. You've got advanced analysis tools, if I was to go into here. And the fact that you can move so freely back and forth between the applications really cuts down on the amount of time you spend messing about and exporting things and trying to link them up and synchronize them. The Essential Sound tab is really useful for applying settings to types of clips and saves you a lot of time. And that works between both applications, of course. So I could choose that here too. There it is. I'd have to select something, of course. Back in multi-track mode. You have to be in the right mode. There we go. And you can see that Audition has some really great features that just aren't available in Premiere. It's a fantastic audio editor in its own right. It can be used for creating podcasts, radio shows, things like that. But what makes it really powerful is the way it interacts with Premiere and the way that you can send data back and forth, and things like clip effects, track effects, volumes, things like that can be transferred easily between the two without rendering unless you want to. So I hope that's really helped you to understand the relationship between these two applications and how they're so much more powerful when they're used together. So good luck in the future using Audition in your Premiere workflow.